here are 4 things that you need to know before you start your first garden. Hello and welcome back to Sanctuary Gardens. I'm Jolene and this is my garden. These 4 things that I'm sharing today are things that you need to look for in preparing where exactly you're going to be placing your garden. When I first began my garden that you see back here, I made mistakes, and I'm going to be sharing some of those today that I've made, and also some mistakes that I avoided. In fact, tip number 4 that I'm sharing today, if I had not done that, it would have been a disastrous mistake. Tip number 1 is to check for sun exposure in the site that you're planning to plant your garden. Ideally, you want at least 6 hours of sun exposure in the area that you're going to be planting your garden. The majority of things that you plant in your garden prefer or need lots of sunlight. Yes, there are a few things that can handle part shade, such as some of the cool season crops can handle a little bit of shade, and some herbs can handle a little bit of shade. But you can create pockets of areas in your garden that has shade for those things, but you can't create sunlight. When we first bought our property here, I spent the first season, I did not start my garden that year. I just watched where the shade was and where the sunlight was. And I kind of did something called sun mapping, where you kind of, as the season progresses, you watch where the sun and the shade ends up. It will be different at different times of the season. For instance, in winter, the sun tends to be lower on the horizon, so you get long shadows. Versus in the summer, the sun tends to be straight overhead and you get more shadows directly underneath things. So if you are planning to plant your garden somewhere that you have maybe some trees around, in the middle of summer, it might look like that area gets a lot of sun. But in the middle of winter, those trees might be causing a lot of shade in that area. And if you can do some winter gardening, that's something you have to keep in mind. Now, do you have to go a whole season without gardening to determine that? No, you don't. There are some apps and devices out there that can assist you if you want to plant things right away. You can, I think there's an app called Sunseeker. You have to pay for it, I believe, where it will help map the different times of the year where the sunlight will be in that particular area you're looking at. And then there's also, I know you can also buy sunlight calculators, which I didn't know that was a thing, but apparently it is, where it's something that you place out and it will calculate how much sun a particular area gets. And you'd probably have to move that around a little bit, but it could give you kind of a rough idea of the different times of year, how much sunlight that gets. Tip number 2 is to pick an area where you can easily see it either from your home, or maybe it's very accessible to you. It's somewhere where you pass by a lot. This may be something that seems like it wouldn't make a huge difference, and a lot of people don't think about this when they're planting their garden. And yet the success of your garden comes from you spending time in it. And so if your garden is out of sight, then it may be something that's out of mind for you and you don't spend as much time taking care of it as you need. When it comes to establishing a new habit, which gardening is a habit, it's a hobby, but it's also a habit, something that you want to start creating within your schedule. When it comes to starting new habits, there is something called the 20-second rule. And it's basically that when you're trying to start a new habit, if it takes more than 20 seconds of your time and energy to get going with it, then you're less likely to do it. So if you can make it so your garden is hopefully within 20 seconds of walking distance from your home, then you're more likely to go out and to tend your garden. I am very lucky that I can actually see my garden from my kitchen window, which is really handy because as I'm prepping what I'm going to be making for my meals, I can look in my garden and see what is out there right now that I can maybe utilize in my cooking that day. It's also great because it's a quick way for me to check on the garden and be like, how does it look? Do I see anything that's flopping over? Maybe the wind knocked it over, or maybe something's looking really dry and I need to water it. So it's a really easy way for me to just, without even leaving my home, I can just quickly scan the garden and check if there's anything that needs my immediate attention. Tip number 3 is make sure that you have access to water. We do collect rainwater in this rain barrel here. This isn't obviously enough to water our garden the whole season, but we do use it for some watering. So I have this rain barrel, but I also have a spigot attached to my house. Now, if you plan to do an irrigation system in your garden, that's great. Even if you're just planning to do some hand watering, be sure that you have, the garden is not so far away that you can't get a hose that will stretch that far. And also make sure that you have enough water. I know that there are some areas in the country where, especially in like hotter climates in California, for instance, they oftentimes put bans on how much water you use. So if you live in an area that does put bans on how much you water, then definitely check in with the city and make plans to know how you're going to be handling that in your garden. All gardens need water. There are ways that you can minimize how much you need to water, but regardless of that, your garden is going to need water. And so this is an absolute must. Now, tip number 4 is the one thing that I almost made a disastrous mistake if I hadn't done this, is to avoid low areas. Your garden will do well on a flat level area or on a slight slope, as long as you're avoiding those really low spots. The one reason is because the low areas tend to be areas where water can pool, or it becomes like a wetland, which in our case, that's what happens in the lower section of our property. And I'll show you, I mean, it is just like, it's like a marshland. And the second reason is cool air tends to pool in low areas. And so you tend to get more frost and fog in those lower areas that can really kill a lot of plants. When we first bought this house, I was looking at planting my garden in this lower section here. As I watched it throughout the season, I quickly realized that that was not going to be the case. We definitely could not put our garden down there because that area pretty much becomes marshland. Let me show you. So here you see this is where my garden is located, and then there's this slight slope that comes down into this lower section here. Now we do have an area right over here that is raised a little bit, and so we plan to do a couple things there, like a little play area for Liam. But if you just notice how much water is pooling around my shoe right here. I mean, this is not even the worst spot. Let me show you the worst spot. I'm not even gonna walk in this area, but as you can see, there is water pooling right there. This area, it takes, it's probably wet for 9 months out of the year. And if I had planted my garden in this lower section, I would have been in huge trouble, and we would have ended up having to move it. I'm glad that I waited and I watched where the low area was and what happened. But if you don't have time on your side, then definitely just avoid those low areas altogether if you can. And instead choose the high areas, choose the flat areas, or even some slight sloping, and your garden should do just fine. So those are the 4 things that you need to do before you start your first garden. But I also have something that you don't need to worry about. Oftentimes when you go online and you type in how to pick a garden site or garden site selection, one of the things that oftentimes comes up is soil quality. And as you notice, I very specifically left that out of my list. And the reason is because as I've done more and more research into learning about gardening, the more I've learned that there are so many other methods that are better than tilling up the ground, the native soil. If you plan to do more traditional gardening where you are tearing up the grass and you're tilling up the land and you're going to be planting in your native soil, then yes, soil fertility, soil quality is something important. If you are willing to learn of alternative ways of gardening that don't require tilling up the ground and using your native soil, I think you'll have really amazing results. I am just digging into this, don't mind the pun. I'm just digging into this whole idea of permaculture where you harmonize with nature in creating a very biodiverse garden where all the systems are working together. And oftentimes, not tilling the ground is part of that, not disturbing the soil. And instead, doing what nature does, basically adding things on top of the soil. You think when you think of a forest, all the leaves fall and the pine needles fall, and they create this natural mulch layer that then slowly decomposes. And think of all the insects and the worms and all these wonderful beneficial things that all the microbes that thrive in that kind of environment. But when we till up the land, we're kind of disturbing all of that ecosystem. And so imagine a system instead where you are adding organic matter on top of the soil, and those microbes can then migrate up into it just like they do in the forest. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time into this because, like I said, I'm still learning. I'm still new to it. Obviously, we chose to do raised garden beds before I really understood about no-till gardening. And the reason we chose this was because our soil here was so clay-like that I just didn't even want to have to deal with tilling it up. But traditionally, how my father gardened was doing the double dig method. And the more I've learned, not that I am discounting what my father taught, but I guess I'm learning and growing and building upon that. And so although I'm not really going to go into that much, I want to challenge you to think beyond just using tilling methods for your garden, and instead look into non-tilling methods. The no-dig method, which Charles Downing made famous. Ruth Stout is another one, or lasagna gardening is another one, or just doing raised garden beds where you're adding soil. Hugelkultur, that's another one that I might have mentioned in a video in the past, and we didn't end up using that in our beds, and I wish we had. But when the day comes and maybe we need to replace these beds, I'm going to be doing hugelkultur because I've learned so much about how that system mimics what nature is meant to do. So I'm leaving you with that. If you are willing to think beyond tilling, then you don't have to even worry about your soil fertility. Instead, you're going to be building your soil fertility as you layer things on top. So just keep that in mind. If you're starting your very first garden this year and you fell upon my video and you found this helpful, I am so glad, and I want to welcome you and congratulate you for coming along on this journey. Gardening is one of the best things you can do for your own self, your own health, your family's health, your neighborhood, for the world. And so I want to encourage you to keep it up. You will make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time, but that's how we learn and that's how we grow. Definitely be sure to hit that subscribe button because I love sharing what I've learned, the mistakes I've made, and so hopefully you don't make those mistakes yourself and you can kind of come along on my own journey and hopefully learn some new things from me. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, give it a like, and we'll see you next time. Go out and grow something. God bless.